Maitland City Council meeting of January 22nd, 2024. If you would please remember to silence your phones and electronic devices and what have you. And anyone wishing to speak, please fill out a speaker card, and we will then have the information we need to make it go a lot easier. Speaker cards in the lobby, speaker cards are at the podium. Let's start this evening with the moment of silence. If you would please join me for a few moments and center ourselves. Okay, thank you. And now, if you would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, let's jump right into the old business. Mr. Remington, is there any old business?
No, sir.
Okay. Consent agenda. Does anybody wish to remove any items from the consent agenda? Okay, we'll stay as is. Any public comment on consent items 2 through 4 on the consent agenda? Seeing none, let's close the public period. And if there's no discussion, a motion will be in order.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I second your motion.
All right. Lori, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Guthrie.
Aye.
Councilmember Paul Harrison. Aye. Councilmember Wartzel. Aye. Councilmember Wild.
Aye.
Mayor Lowens.
Aye. And motion carries. We have a consent agenda. Public period. Is there anybody who would, we're going to open the public period to anybody who would like to address City Council or anybody else this evening? Here we have a taker. Great.
It's been a while since I was up here touting things we had, because now we have things again. So first I would like to invite you on Friday evening to attend our Poetry Coffee House. This is an after-hours open mic night. You may read your own original poetry if you would like, or you can just listen to other people's original poetry. The first hour is usually dedicated to the theme. This quarter's theme is Take a Leap, because of course this year will be a leap year. And then we will also announce the theme for our annual poetry contest on Friday. It's going to be a really fun one. So I look forward to reading the poems for the contest. That will open March 1st. One event that's just a little further away, but we don't see each other again for several weeks. So Saturday, February 17th at 3 p.m., we will be having an Eras party, Maitland Public Library's edition. So grab all of your Taylor Swift stuff, come to the party. We will make friendship bracelets, we will be able to trade them, we will have crafts and trivia, and of course, all the Taylor Swift music you can possibly stand in 2 hours. So we invite, it's a party for all ages, so grown-ups, kids, everybody else, please come to our Eras party on Saturday, February 17th at 3 o'clock. I also have one other mission. It's actually not my mission. I've just been asked by Kristen Johnson of the Maitland Library Vote For Committee to remind you all to check your email, please. And she'll be sending you a follow-up email tomorrow from the committee. So.
I have a question. Is that Taylor Swift night, is it going to be an open mic for that?
I'm not sure if they're yet planning karaoke or if they're just planning dancing.
I'll come ready for both.
Yeah. I will tell you that I struggled with doing some of the advertising because I had to double check. Of course, you know, it was every thing, like come shake it off at the library. And I haven't listened to Taylor Swift since Tears on My Guitar came out, so it's been a few years. And so there are going to be a lot of Taylor Swift things to come.
I think Councilman Guthrie wanted to come out and do his own version of Karma.
And we are going to be curating this music list, so anything that has an E next to it will not be on our library list. You want to sing that at the top of your lungs in the car. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Stacy. we're in the public period. Is anybody else who'd like to join our open mic this moment? Okay. Let's close the public period. And decisions this evening, we have 2 slots on the Sustainability Advisory Board. Lauren, would you like to introduce the appointments?
The Sustainability Advisory Board has 2 vacancies. Mark Walsh was appointed by council to serve a 3-year term beginning February 2021 and expiring January 2024. Carl Wilhelm was your most recent appointment. He was to fill the unexpired term of a board member that resigned. He was serving from October 2023 to January 2024. In accordance with the SAB Constitution, members may be appointed by council for 1 successive term, and a member that fills an unexpired term that does not exceed 2 years shall be eligible for reappointment for initial term. Both Mr. Wilhelm and Mr. Walsh are our only 2 applicants seeking to be appointed to the board, and they both have SAB as their first choice.
Okay. That should make it easy, you think, but sometimes things are not so easy. Let's take nominations from council members for one or both.
I'll do Mark Walsh.
Okay. We have Mark Walsh for 1. I think we can just go down and do first, second, third if we'd like to on this. Is there just 2 seats, 2 possible contestants?
Second that.
Okay. First and a second for Mr. Walsh, and I'll make it a third.
Oh, so you're doing them all. You're doing one at a time now. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Gotcha.
Sorry. Okay. All right. And for the second one, we would like to nominate for the second seat.
Sure.
I'll second that. Mr. Wilhelm, right? Is that what you're going with?
Yes,
Okay.
that is exactly who I was.
She nominated Carl Wilhelm.
Yeah, I did.
And I'll third.
First, second, and third. Congratulations, Mr. Walsh and Mr. Wilhelm. You are to continue in your slots for the next 3 years. Awesome. All right. Okay, now we have discussion. Our discussion tonight, first item is waterfront structure appeal. Dan, would you like to introduce it for us?
Sure. So good evening, Mayor, Council. Good evening. Good evening. So I'm here tonight before you to get direction on future waterfront structure permit appeals. So as you recall, the past several years, staff has denied several waterfront structure permits, and a lot of those have resulted in appeals to council. Currently, the Land Development Code states that anyone, including the applicant, can appeal within 15 days of staff's decision. If the appeal is not filed, then the staff's decision is final. However, if an appeal is final, the appeal shall be heard by the council at their next available public hearing. As you recall, in early 2022, council adopted an overhaul to our Land Development Code, which had a lot of improvements, a lot of updates, including providing some consistency among some of the procedures and processes. And among these processes included appeals, put all appeals to council under section 2.5.4D4, which states that council's decision, amongst other criteria, must be based on finding of evidence that there was a clear error made by staff. However, in September of 2022, council adopted Ordinance 1407, which refined some of the language in the earlier adopted overhaul, some of those being specifically to the waterfront structure permits, including removing the waterfront structure permit from the post-decision limitation actions, adding different new waterfront structure permit appeals procedures, removing the waterfront structure permits from the types of appeals that were in the general section of the Land Development Code, reestablishing the 15-day appeal process, and removing the codified standards from the waterfront structure appeals to council that were specific in there. Essentially, this returned the waterfront structure process back to the state where they were prior to the overhaul that's been in effect for the past 20 plus years. So ordinance 1407 reinstated the pre-22 language, giving council full direction, or full discretion, excuse me, on waterfront structure permit appeals. So during a previous appeal, council discussed certain criteria in the code regarding the grounds for appeal that were found in the code at the time. However, that language was amended by the ordinance 1407, which removed those standard exceptions and returned it back to the previous 20-year criteria. But since the ordinance 1407 had not been codified yet in the Land Development Code, it did show up in Unicode, but only if only the person would look at it in the ordinance section where the uncodified ordinances resided. So it was pretty confusing at that time. So what we're asking for tonight is there's a couple different options council may consider. One is continue with the current practice, which allows full discretion for council on these appeals without any specific standards, or optional is to direct staff to develop specific standards. And if that's the case, the staff would come back to council with some standards similar to like the variance criteria for council to follow when making decisions on the appeals. This could possibly eliminate some inconsistent decisions. However, due to certain lot formations and a kind of a case-by-case basis, it would constrain council's abilities to examine properties as they come about on a case-by-case. So with that, staff is seeking council direction for the preparation of an ordinance amending the Land Development Code, if necessary, regarding standards to consider for future waterfront structure appeals. Should council choose option 2, then staff would take the direction received tonight and bring back at a future council meeting an ordinance for your consideration. With that, we'll be happy to answer any questions and looking for council's direction on which area we'd like to go.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Does anybody have any questions of Dan on this? If nobody has any particular questions of Dan, is there anything who would like to discuss this item? There's other discussion, so we can have various options to going forward or leaving it as is, or
So I'll kick it off. So I talked to Mark, I'm sure we all did, and I had looked at some of the lot sizes and lot shapes and formations that are on the lake, and there is so much different between each lot. Like each lot goes to different parts. Some of them slope in like this, some of them extend to the middle of the lake, some don't. And so the existing docks that are around the lake, if you look, a lot of them don't conform as it sits, and so to try to design rules. I mean, the task here is, I think we all sit here, and I think the comment has been, when this comes up, we all feel like we're taking, it's an ad lib on each time, and none of us like that. We all like to know kind of what direction. But to try to draw a box or a circle or whatever around this is going to be tough. And so I think that the discretion element, unfortunately, I don't love that. Personally, I don't love just throwing it up there. But given the uniqueness of all these lots and the varying circumstances that are out there, I think to try to confine this with rules, I think is going to be challenging. So it's, again, it wouldn't be my choice to say just have it be discretion and kind of leave it. But given the nature of these lots, I don't know that there's another great option. I did talk to Mark, and the only thing I would sort of tweak about it, and I don't think it needs to be written anywhere, is that to try to get a staff recommendation, even though it's full discretion, it doesn't have to be necessarily phrased as a recommendation, just a staff analysis on it, so that when it comes back and we're discussing it, there's a basis that staff has in a report, so that we can make a little bit more of an informed discussion around what staff is doing to analyze it. As far as sort of giving us a shape of decision, but I just don't think there's I just don't think there's a better way to do it. That's my thought.
Is there a way to get closer to best practices or guidelines rather than a set absolute rule that we would have to work off of? I mean, is that even possible to find?
That was what I was thinking too, but the problem is to try to even come up with rules, given the uniqueness of each lot. It's like, well, we should try our best not to have it this way. Well, that doesn't really work. And The thing that made me a little uncomfortable was when it comes in and you start getting those easements that go into next door neighbor properties and then what that effect is.
Because it's more than just the two landowners who are currently agreeing to whatever they're doing.
It's future landowners.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
where, the problem I have with that is I don't think the city should take a position
Yeah.
on that, because we don't want to be involved in a potential future dispute between
Yeah.
subsequent landowners. So I don't think the city wants to have a real role in that, because it
For obvious reasons.
it just doesn't, like the insurance question. And then, okay, what if the future owner doesn't get insurance? Does that mean the easement that's there goes away? And I don't know that we want to have that. I don't know that we really want to be involved in disputes or between property owners. I just don't know that that's where we want to be. So that's why I think leaving it as discretion, and then if we say, well, that just doesn't look like that's going to be acceptable, is probably the better way to go. Because mandating that the easement, we would say, okay, fine, there has to be an easement, but the easement has to say what? I don't know. Depends on what it's just, I'm with you. I talked to Mark about that, I just don't know if there's a good answer, so.
Question I had, and I asked Mark, and he didn't have the answer. I'm not throwing you under the bus, Mark. You don't have the answer to everything. But maybe, Dan, in your experience, what other cities which have lots of waterfront property, which has these boat dock issues, is there anything that we could be looking to those places for any guidance on how they handle this?
I don't have that answer either. I can look into that and see what we can find. We do have a lot of irregular shaped lots and a lot of things that are unique to Maitland. So that's where having a strict criteria or any even general criteria makes it very difficult, because everything is, there's not a one size fits all in the lakes here and a lot of sizes.
You could just restart the lake.
This is what I would suggest, because, I mean, we have Cliff here, and Cliff's been here for, what, 115 years?
130
close.
yeah.
But in all the years I've been coming here, this has popped up a lot. I would ask your advice, Cliff, as what's your thoughts?
Well, here's the good news. Between having represented Mount Dora for 10 years and this since Methuselah, this city since Methuselah, I have experienced a lot of boat issues. My very first case for the city was a boat dock case you've heard me mention before, and it was man-made Lake Jackson, which has the man-made characteristic of right angles, which you don't typically see in a natural shored lake. And it makes it very difficult to come up with criteria. You know, the difficult part from the lawyer's chair is no criterion leads to potential arguments of arbitrary and capriciousness, and that's my number one concern about having no criteria. But the problem is pretty much elucidated by Mike and you all recognize, is that every circumstance is fact-driven. And if you look at what our criteria are for approval, we look at whether something unreasonably interferes with another property owner's littoral and riparian rights. And unreasonable, by definition, requires you all to weigh in as to whether it is or isn't. That's not easy to do. And you can see, if you go back to, again, the Lake Jackson example, this property owner cannot block this property owner, and that's a problem. Well, you have that on steroids, depending on you've got some natural lakes with some weird corners and cut-ins and bays and so forth and so on. And everybody who goes to the expense of paying for waterfront property wants to be able to use it, among other things, to put in a dock and or boathouse. So I don't know a way around it. I think that the reason we crafted it the way we did is so that there would be consideration, which there wasn't previously, for those riparian or littoral rights of other property owners. We also crafted into it, as you saw in the last appeal, what do your neighbors think? And really, I don't think that we would have run into a headache so much with that one if it weren't for the fact that in order for it to work, the property owner who needed the permit couldn't just come in and stick it on somebody else's property without the other owner's permission. That's where the easement came in. And then it got further complicated because the party given the easement, in this case the Schieferdeckers, wanted protection of insurance. that's why I got into reviewing the easement as much as anything else, to make sure that the easement itself didn't go away, even if the original property owner stopped paying for the insurance. And those things are not conditional on one another. But that, I don't know that there's a way to avoid that, because the interest we're trying to protect as a city is not allowing somebody to put a structure on someone else's property without a legal right to do so, and that requires a document of which we're not a party, an easement. So I don't have a better solution, and my experience tells me that we are probably as good as we can get in terms of criteria. I'm happy to look at it or do whatever you want. We can certainly do a survey. There's enough lakefront communities around here. Winter Park, obviously. I've mentioned Mount Dora before, and even in Mount Dora, I know Mark will remember, we had an area that had these really funky boathouses. You've heard me mention it before, and we had to constantly deal with, okay, they've been destroyed, they would never meet code today, what can we do? Should we allow them because they couldn't qualify, it's too narrow, they didn't have enough setback, and all those things. There really are specifically driven questions based on things that don't really fit in a nice package, like, do the neighbors object? Other than providing boating hazards and obstructing somebody else's views, I don't know what else you can do, because there is no cookie cutter solution. As long as man-made lakes and natural lakes have uneven shorelines, it's going to be that way. I just don't see how you fix it.
Cliff, under the way that it's all written and put together bothers me a lot, just because I guess it just says the city council may affirm, reverse, or modify, which is what was read to us at the last time we voted, and then I didn't know that it was updated and all that. But first of all, it's not clear to me. It says it's how it modifies or alters the regular rules that apply to most other land development code. So to me, if it's specific, like a number of days of appeal, then it's clear that it's overriding the other appellate grounds. But if it just says you may affirm, reverse, or modify, to me it's not clear reading that's taking it outside of the existing appellate.
Yeah, that could be clarified, sure.
But also, I guess, just because I've never seen something where there just are no criteria. It's completely discretionary on appeal or like on a review of something, and then it's hard to see how someone could ever have review outside of this, even though technically they do. What grounds would a circuit court ever review us on, or a county court?
Well, and again, you're absolutely right, and that's why, as I mentioned, what they would they might not understand everything about what municipal law is about, but they get arbitrary and capricious. Okay, and that's why it concerned me. But if you're having a built-in appellate process that goes to you, which is a choice, you don't have to have that. You could leave it at staff and say, if you don't like staff decision, go to the circuit courts. But not your particular body, but the body that preceded you 20 plus years ago said, now we don't want to have to make people go to court. We want to try to solve it locally, which, okay, that makes sense. But if I told you, okay, you have to stick with the record that was established below. Well, there was no easement below. So what would you do? Well, I'm sorry, you don't get it. That was the criteria. Because for the typical appeal, you don't get to supplement the record. It is what it is. Well, they come in, they file an application, and the staff says, you don't meet the criterion. They are now boxed in unless you allow additional information. And if you do, then that sort of opens it up almost like a trial de novo, if you will, for the lawyers on the group. And what that means is you start from fresh, Vance. That means like this has never happened. And I don't have a better solution to that. And you're right, if it was to go from here to a reviewing court, they would probably have to treat the staff level procedure as just kind of, maybe not background noise, but instructional. But what we did here as the record they're really reviewing, I don't have a better answer.
Is it too, I don't know, is there a downside to putting something in there about hardship or good?
Well, yes, because none of this is a hardship. If you actually look at the definition of hardship, which is applied to variances, hardship has to not be self-created. It has to not exist when you get there. Well, if you got the piece of property and God didn't change it, where's the hardship?
So without a hurricane or
Yeah.
intervening. I think, yeah, I guess the issue is too, because we always have to make decisions based on not just who's sitting up here now, but future. I mean, it just gives so much room for people just
It does.
to show favoritism or just willy-nilly whatever. And it's very difficult sitting up here to make decisions when you're trying to be objective, which I know the five of us always are. You know, I guess that's the issue, but I don't want
It is.
to make it overcomplicated.
It is one of those situations in which it is a difficult problem to solve, even given the very few times we have as a city been impacted by it. When we have, both the property owners and you all as deciders, you and prior versions of you, have struggled because the property owners want what they want. Understandably, they pay for waterfront property, you want to be able to use it. Sometimes neighbors object, sometimes neighbors don't, and then y'all are stuck in the middle of something you'd rather not be stuck in the middle of. But the alternative, as I said, is send it to the court. That didn't seem to please the council at the time, and that's why we have a procedure.
My only other thing was, my question based on what you were saying is, I know that part of the procedure is that staff has to send the notices to the neighbors or the property owners. I don't see anything in the current language on appeal to us that we even have to necessarily consider that the property owners adjacent objected. So that doesn't bind us in any way from what I'm reading. They
No.
could all say no, thank you, and
No.
it doesn't matter.
It's something to consider, it's not binding. Although obviously you can imagine that some folks sitting where you sit would consider it binding if a neighbor objected, others wouldn't, and that's really is the nature of who's up here at a given time when the matter comes before them.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, you could see a situation where, you know, the good faith efforts that we took, for instance, and I think it was the dock that was last time with next to the Sheepherdeckers. You know, they could have constructed within the guidelines. They could have constructed, but in doing so, they would have cut right across the front of their neighbor's house. Because the property line went out like that, they would have ended up, you know, blocking the view, which didn't make any sense. It was nonsensical. So I think we came to the, you know, good faith decision with the Sheepherdeckers they were giving the easement. That was easy to do. But to your point, Lori, you know, you say, well, in a future council, you know, and maybe it's just, you know, a guy wants to build a huge boat dock, and he wants to build within 3 inches of the setback, and he just wants to because he wants to, and he's got a big old boat, and 3 people sitting on council happen to be in the Elks Club with him, you know, and, you know, then you get a bad faith vote, and that's it's not, you know, we would like to guard against that, but, you know, as Mike points out, this is just so difficult. I mean, there's so many different variations of what could possibly happen. I don't know. I would hope that, you know, all the councils up here after us are all going to be good faith actors, and that's not going to be a problem. And they'll try to figure out what to do to effectuate the goals of the ordinance, which are to not come into, you know, into conflict with your neighbors, and to, you know, environmental safeguards, and et cetera. But I just don't know how we can improve what we have, other than to hope that the 5 people making the decision do so, you know, with the community's best interest at heart. Which leaves a certain amount of good faith, just hoping it's going to happen. And, you know, it might not happen at some point.
And there are plenty of things like that in government and courts and things like that that are just purely discretionary. It is what it is. And so if that's what it is, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't any way. And I do think, to me, and it sounds like everyone, it's a greater harm to be overly confined by criteria that create an unjust situation in some fact pattern, as opposed to the alternative. So.
Well, if I use the example that we just went through, okay, as an example, where the solution to make it work required property owners to get along. In the absence of that easement, we would have had no choice, because they cannot meet setbacks and do not qualify for a variance. Impossible. That means you can't please everybody all the time. Welcome to the role of being a judge.
I agree with you, Lori. This part, I think, is what you're saying. None of us like to be in this spot. I mean, it doesn't feel great to just have to ad-lib it, but.
What I think is fascinating, this is just purely an academic discussion, but from literally my day job. Some municipalities require that there be an actual conveyance. If a house is built over a line into an adjoining property, and then they want to repair the roof, I've seen it before where you have to get a quitclaim deed for the 3 feet because they won't mess with providing an easement when that in its own way is discretionary and comes with legal risks to the party who are both burdened and benefiting from that easement. So in this case, we could have just as easily said, no, the Sheever-Deckers are going to have to deed that piece of the lot to the adjacent neighbor in order for them to build out. And that would have obviously created a carve-out. But, I think there are legal remedies to solve these problems on a one-off basis, but I don't think as a whole that we can create those sorts of guidelines because it's just every property is unique, literally.
Okay. Do we have kind of a general feeling here, Vance? I haven't heard from you. Anything yet?
Well, it's, the whole thing is, and John, we've been through this. We've seen some really great, city councils up here, and then we've seen some ones that are there to help friends. And so that's one of my concerns always. But I mean, listening to everything going on, I think that we're kind of just really, that's still the best way of doing it. So I think hands are almost kind of tied in this position. So that's my thought.
Especially if you went to overall. And it doesn't even have to be a nefarious purpose. It could just be that you have a council member who hates water. I don't know. I don't know. I can't even think of the right example, but they have, some sort of niche concern or whatever. But I think overall, when we're looking at what the interest is of the community overall, it's for us to have just some sort of discretion.
There was one council person who hated trees, so
There you go.
there you go.
Okay. Well, so it sounds like we're all satisfied with the way it sits right now. We don't want to send Dan back to do lots of work, although he's happy to do it.
All the time.
Should have to do some statutory construction, for sure.
That's it.
No, just let it go.
Okay. Well, if anybody else wants to bring something else up on this in the future, it's open for discussion later, but let's bring that to a close for tonight. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
And go to filing Form 6, which may be even more fun.
This is going to be a lot more fun, guaranteed.
Mark, would you introduce the item for us?
Sure. At the January 8th City Council meeting, we had a lengthy discussion on Form 6. Discussion revolved around a bunch of different topics. Some concerns were raised regarding the additional cost to individual council members regarding preparation of the form, whether it was allowable expense under the charter provisions that we talked about last meeting, type of information that was required to be provided, what kind of disclosure requirements there were, whether it was subject to sunshine, depending on how you would acquire that information, the possibility of the city soliciting qualified individuals to assist the council in preparation of the form, and a little bit of talk on purchasing procedures if that option were chosen. So what we ended up with was some direction to Cliff to take a look at the charter provisions and provide an opinion on that. That opinion has been attached to the agenda item. So in a nutshell, what Cliff has opined is that under the provision of the charter that states that the council member shall receive actual necessary expenses incurred in the performance of their duties of office, that this would be an allowable reimbursable expense. So if there was expense that was incurred by an individual council member for the preparation of the Form 6, that could be submitted, and we could reimburse it under this provision in the charter. There's some details about how that would be done, but we can sort of put that file out away in terms of where some of the key questions need to be answered as we move forward. We also discussed having staff vet financial professionals who could assist council members in preparation of the form. Regarding that, I did reach out to our lobbyists in Tallahassee, since they would have the most hands-on experience in dealing with this, and to dealing with the legislatures all the time, to see if there's a group up there or a consistency in terms of who helps legislators fill out the Form 6. I have not received a reply from Angela or Ryan as of today, but they said they were going to sort of walk it around to see if there is some consistency. As I discussed with one or two of you today, if you actually take a look at the Form 6s that are on file out there, just in terms of what the information is provided, it's all over the board. It's very unique to each individual that's filing it. So I didn't see any consistency within the Form 6s that are available on the Ethics Commission's Department of Ethics Commission's website. So, but in either circumstance, as far as the reimbursable expense, the councilperson would be able to contract directly with the preparer, and then get reimbursed for those costs if we chose to go down that route. So the sort of the three questions I boiled it down to was, number one, is this, if we have Cliff's opinion, you can sort of ask him how he came to that. Do you agree with that opinion? That the cost is allowable expense? And do you think that that should be something that you would want to be reimbursed for? So that's the first question, because the answer is, even if you disagree with Cliff's opinion, then you have determination as a group, because you're the ones that interpret the charter. But if you agree with it but still don't want to take a reimbursement, that's just as important. That gives us direction on how we move forward from a policy perspective. The second question that sort of comes up is, do you want to set any limits on the amount of that expense? We don't have any idea what that would be at this point in time, but we have to see if there's going to be a cap put on that, or whether we would, if we decide to go down that road, whether we would just sort of let it ride this year and see what those expenses look like, and then budget appropriately for that in the coming years. Sort of last question is, because the question came up, as far as finding someone, do you still want staff to vet potential professionals to assist the council in preparation of the form? So those are kind of the three questions that we can get one or more of those answers. We walk out of here and get some direction. Obviously, there's a little bit of time still. We have until July to file your forms. But now is a good time to start the discussion and move forward with it. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Of course, it's available also.
Mark, are those questions on one, would those be decision items for a later date?
If we move forward, as I laid out the staff report, I think we would want a policy in place, and that would be a decision item. That would be one of the policies, one of our financial policies that we would include in the budget every year. At the back end of the budget, we have all our financial policies. I think we're going to be moving forward with reimbursement. We want to put that in there so it's always available. So current staff, future staff, current city council, and future city council understands that there's an allowance for it and procedure for it to happen. So it's all laid out. It would be brought to you as a decision item, as an approval of a new policy for the budget.
Okay. All right. So, as you pointed out, Mark, then the first question is answered by Cliff's memo, which is he feels like under our charter, some of our individual expenditures for having an accountant do this, help us through this, would be covered by, or reimbursed by the city. Is there any discussion on that? That seems pretty straightforward. And further, your opinion is also that the backup would not be a public record.
And that is correct, because it's your own backup, as opposed to if we were doing it as a contract in the city for you, then you'd have to provide the data to the city, which would make it a public record. The interesting part about this necessary and actual, and the thing that concerned me last time, so I've given it some thought, is there's nothing that limits the reasonableness of it. But as I've considered it, first of all, you should know that this charter language in your charter is not unusual, and I know that because I searched the exact phrase and found some opinions on the AG website that don't deal in any way with this issue or anything that's exactly on point, but do quote this language. So this is not language which is unfamiliar to me or other charters. And the context of trying to, in the legal world, 4 of the 5 of you will know, we're used to thinking, what's a reasonable lawyer's fee, or what's reasonable fees and costs? And without seeing that word, it gave me pause. But I think if you were going to, for example, do what the city manager is suggesting here and come up with some sort of a guideline or policy as to what is appropriate, you could potentially categorize it under that necessary thing. So while maybe $4,000 is necessary, $10,000 is not, depending on what y'all find is typically charged for this sort of stuff. But the reason, much like the waterfront appeal, is hard to determine is it's one set of circumstances if you're, to pardon a recent example, Donald Trump's finances versus my finances, the level of review you might need to get the right answer is substantially different. And so it may be a different cost as to what is necessary and actual. But there is, I think that necessary part gives you some level of discretion.
Okay.
Look, you were talking about, public record. I mean, this is still all public record. I mean,
The reports are, the backup data is what we're talking about.
Excuse me. Okay.
Because what we were concerned with before is,
Yeah.
like if you had the city filing your tax returns, you'd have to give them all the stuff to do it from. Well,
Right.
that's going to be a
So
problem.
then that would be copied and saved.
That's a
and
problem.
Scanned. Gotcha.
Okay, and so there were a couple of different ways that I think we were discussing last time that would perhaps answer for this. One is to have the city go out and try to find a CPA or several CPAs from whom we could choose to have our taxes done or our response to Form 6 done. Or we do it by ourselves and just have the city reimburse us for our people who might have a relationship with already, and so it would go fine. Is there any,
Based
on
on,
that?
yeah, I talked to Mark, I'm sure we all did, but it sounds like the city taking on the responsibility of finding someone's probably not super fun for Mark. So I think that probably we would be left to our own. I think that I'm hoping that this is, the hype over this has just died down a little bit, and that this isn't, I think I unfortunately looked because I don't like looking at what other people have done. It just doesn't seem that the information's all that relevant, but it's not exact the way people have been filling them out, so there does seem to be some interpretation on these forms from various people. And I think that, I almost think we should defer kind of the conversation maybe for a little bit. I haven't tried to fill it out yet. I've looked at it. I'm thinking we maybe just wait and see if this becomes, how problematic this becomes. It's good to know the information. It's good to know that we could have the expenses reimbursed. If we start to encounter some problems, maybe we bring it up and say, hey, we've encountered some problems. I've talked to an accountant, it's going to cost X. If it's a reimbursable expense, can we put some sort of policies around having those things reimbursed? But I'm thinking that we just let this one sit for a little bit, and then as it becomes closer to filing time and we all start to dig into this and see if this is, how challenging this is, we kind of revisit. I also think that giving this even more play is sort of feeding into the frenzy a little bit of it, so I'm thinking maybe we just let this one sit for a little bit. That's my thought.
Okay.
And visit it as it gets closer to July or June, whenever the
So
final date is.
here's just my thought on that. Is one, we'll have to remember to come back and revisit it. That's on us to do, right? And two is, no, I'm with y'all, is I think we find, pick our own accountant to do these. What I would like to see if the city would do is just, because this is brand new, a lot of accountants don't know this.
Right.
So if you could reach out, if the city would reach out to people in the Senate or the House that they, might have a connection with, and just ask, who are you using? And then, we can vet those people, give us a list that when it comes time, we could use and just kind of vet it ourselves.
From what it seems like everybody's using their own, whoever files their taxes. I don't think they're going out and finding specialist accountant X who just helps them with forms.
Well, every accountant I talk to, they're like, what are you talking about?
I
Sure.
think that the issue is like Martha Stewart could tell all of us that your accountant doesn't provide legal protection. Your accountant is an expert or not on Form 6, they can give you bad advice and that doesn't insulate you.
Right.
Well, that's a good example, right? Because
Well, Mark gave me the name, so I'm going to blame him.
thought, which I think is really part of Mark or any staff concern, is not certainly also wanting to accept any sort of responsibility, liability, blame, whatever, not really for the task or the time it takes to do that. And I know Mark has tried to reach out to like FLC and the lobbyists and different people to varying levels of lack of response or helpfulness because no one wants to take on responsibility or liability for this. So attorneys who did this sort of thing would probably give you the best advice. And I know you called ethics advisory or someone because I listened to your guys' discussion from the last time. And I think it's also important, I mean, this isn't an auditing thing. So in terms of the dying down, I think the real issue is it's invasive. It's, in my personal opinion, unnecessarily invasive, but that's the concern, and that's not going away, and there's also nothing we can do about that as we sit here. It's filing, period. So other than that, I think in terms of the danger, I think what Mike's saying, because I've looked at a lot of them too, because I love I say like a form or a template. And so using it when other people who've had to do Form 6 for forever have done. And a lot of those people are in Tallahassee and they have more complex finances than I do, which means they all have accountants that they come through to me, like Mike said. So I think that it's probably more what it looks like to me is copying and pasting from other forms of like, here's all the, and it's just like varies in terms of how much they're giving you from, one investment account has 55 different sub accounts and so on and so forth. And I think that's where the variance is and what people are listing. But I don't think you're being dishonest if you're including everything and you don't give enough detail or something like that. Or that's how I'm interpreting it personally. And so I just think that that's why it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the city to give us, any people. Plus, I just like to have my own people. I don't want to be limited because I do have my people that do my extremely sophisticated and complex finances.
I think just what bothers me is that they took it from $10,000 to a $20,000 fine. So I mean, really, you could pay a fine more than you make doing this job for 6 years.
No, it's all bothersome. I don't think anyone's arguing that. There's entire councils who agree with you as reflected in their resignations. But I think that I just don't know that there's a professional that can protect you. And frankly, even a lawyer, again, they might be more inclined to give you advice regarding what the law means and doesn't mean. I don't think an accountant is generally going to want to give you an interpretation of what a law means. But even a lawyer can't insulate you from responsibility. So I think that there isn't a professional that exists that can really do that, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Cliff, I know you represent a lot of other cities. Has this been a conversation at other places? I know you represent a lot of other cities. Has this been a conversation?
Well, at last count, and this is on the local government listserv, which maybe some of you guys are on, but if not, over 100 statewide municipal officials at last count, and I say over 100 like it might be 150, it's a bunch, have resigned over not wanting to fill out the form, so they had resigned by the end of the year. Others are just now waking up to the fact, oh, wait a minute, what? And so there may be other resignations, but with the unwitting learning after the fact that they still have to do Form 6 even if they resign now. And so, yeah, it's a huge topic of discussion. Just to let you know how new it is, and if you knew anything about this group, you know how rare it is. I put this out there to see if anyone disagreed with my opinion or even had an opinion or was dealing with it. I used the exact language from your charter. So I'm getting this in front of the eyeballs of everybody who does this in our profession across the state. I only had one reply that said, I agree with you. That is a reimbursable expense. And that's literally the extent of the analysis. And so, it's a problem for a lot of reasons. It seems to be an overreach. particularly when you consider some of the stuff that goes on in that place out west they call Tallahassee. But I cannot imagine that it's going to get any better. I don't think they're going to fix it. And it's almost like if we're stuck in the mud, we want you to be stuck with us, and they have to do Form 6. So I think that's what's going to be the standard going forward. I think it is going to influence who will and won't continue to want to serve. It's not easy to do. And it is personal information, given what you guys have to do to just do the job and to add this to the mix. I thought Form 1 was sufficient. Maybe I'm wrong, but again, nobody elected me for any of these jobs. So yes, it's difficult. Yes, everybody's struggling. You're the only one who has asked me so far about reimbursement because of the specific provision in your charter. Not everybody has it. I still think even in the absence of a charter provision, they would be able to do it, but the difference is that your charter says shall be entitled to. And so unless there's a way to put a limit on it based on what is necessary, where you could exercise some level of judgment, it's not whether you need a policy. Even in the absence of policy, you submit an invoice, it'll be up to someone else to prove it's not necessary, because the charter language is there, in my opinion. And again, there may be an alternative opinion at some point, there just isn't one now.
Do we want to bring this back, say like in June sometime for a discussion, or?
I'm thinking, Vince, well, we kind of left this one, if you come to a point where there's something worth this, I think what we've said is, it is a reimbursable expense. I don't think anybody on the council is opposed to it being reimbursed, right, if there was an expense. And so I think we just sort of let it go, and if you feel like when you're filling it out that you want to get reimbursed for an expense from an accountant, then you kind of go and work with Mark, and then if that becomes a topic necessary for discussion, then we bring it back. But absent that, I mean, it was on us to file Form 1, it's on us to file Form 6. We're all going to do it. It's my responsibility to file taxes on April 15th.
So everybody's gonna just go find your own person? Yeah.
I think if we all want to share with Mark who we eventually find, I don't see that there's any sort of sunshine issue with Mark sharing that information with us.
Right, I agree.
Right, if you contact somebody and you find an expert on this, sharing that information would be great.
Yeah.
But
I
absent
thought about that earlier today. Yeah, that's not a sunshine. I mean, you just send it to Mark, and then Mark can vet it out to everybody else.
But also, I think the last issue being putting a cap, I think this is all too new. We don't have enough information. We have no idea how much this actually would cost. And of course, the subjective nature of all of our finances means that for each of us, this will cost a different amount just because of the amount of labor involved. So I think we're all level-headed people up here, and it's discretionary. We know that there's probably a number where we would feel uncomfortable submitting something for reimbursement because that just seems abusive. But I don't think any of us are going to get to that point. So I don't think putting a cap on it also seems like something appropriate at this point because we just don't have enough information to know what that means.
I feel like this council is a good council to make this be a test run for this year. I think everybody's pretty reasonable up here.
Okay. Good. All right, I think that should conclude the discussion. We can bring it back. It's open for...
I think if we need to, like Mike said, if we need to, then just talk to Mark and have him put it back on the agenda.
Yep. All right. Okay. Reports. Mr. City Attorney, anything?
Nothing new that I can report as of the end of the day today.
Okay.
That may change tomorrow.
Mr. City Manager?
Just a reminder, this Saturday, the police department's having their family fun day out here at Independence Square from 11 to 2, so drop on by. It's usually a really good crowd, really good event.
Okay. Great.
Yes, sir.
Council members, anything to report?
I got one question for Cliff. Cliff, I saw something on the news today about the millage rate, the scope of the millage rate widening. In Tallahassee, they're looking at a potential bill which would kind of start handcuffing more of the cities, potential of the cities. You know anything about that?
I do not know about it. I will find out if there's anything to report and get it back to you the next meeting. I'll find out sooner, and I'll send out an email that can be distributed. But if it's making your life harder, then I'm sure they're doing it.
Yeah, it was very vague. I think it was like Channel 6 News or something, but it was kind of vague, so that's all I wanted to ask.
Okay, all right. Anything else? Anybody? Last chance? Okay, we stand adjourned now.
Have you seen the house that we just did? We're putting through for, so